Hello. Tonight, we are going to take a long, quiet walk through one of the oldest storytelling traditions that still whispers to us today, Celtic mythology. These are tales that were never written down by their first tellers, but carried in memory across generations, around hilltop fires, in the voices of poets and druids, and only centuries later set to parchment by monks who struggled to make sense of gods that refused to be tamed. In this video, we will walk the entire arc from a world before gods existed, through invasions and heroic deeds, to the slow fading of the old ways, and the echoes that still reach us in fairy tales, fantasy, and the names of places we pass every day. So, before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you'd like to hear more stories like this. And if the night feels right, feel free to share where you are listening from and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, settle in comfortably, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We walk into a world that does not yet have gods, only wind moving through tall grass, and the quiet weight of memory resting in stone. You can almost hear the slow breathing of the land itself, rivers sliding through valleys, fires whispering in hilltop camps, footsteps fading into mist. To understand Celtic mythology, we have to begin with something uncomfortable for modern minds. There was no single Celtic people, and no single sacred book. What we call the Celts were dozens of related tribes spread across Ireland, Britain, Gaul, and parts of Iberia and Central Europe. They shared artistic styles, languages, and religious instincts, but they were never one empire, never one nation, and never one unified faith. Their stories grew locally, shifted over centuries, and survived only because someone, somewhere, chose to remember them. That matters, because Celtic myth is not a neat bookshelf of sacred texts. It is a patchwork quilt sewn from oral tradition, fragments written down by Christian monks, and echoes preserved in folklore. For centuries, stories were carried in human memory, shaped by performance, ritual, and the needs of each generation. When Irish monks finally began recording these myths between roughly the 8th and 12th centuries, they were not neutral archivists. They were editors with a worldview. They softened pagan gods into kings. They slipped Christian morals into ancient tales. They preserved names, battles, and miracles, but often rearranged the meaning. So, when we talk about Celtic mythology, we are never talking about pure history. And we are not talking about pure fiction either. We are standing in a blurred zone where myth and memory overlap. For the Celts, that overlap was not a problem. It was how the world worked. Their universe was layered, not metaphorically layered, literally layered. There was the everyday human world of farms, cattle, hearth fires, and tribal feuds. And there was the Otherworld, a parallel reality that existed beside it, not above or below it. You did not have to die to reach it. You could stumble into it through a foggy hill pass, a hidden cave, or the wrong turn at a riverbank. In Irish tradition, it might be called Tir na nog. In Welsh stories, Annan. In later romance, Avalon. Different names, same idea. A world that overlaps ours like a reflection in dark water. Time did not behave normally there. A single night of feasting could equal decades in the human world. A hero could return home and find everyone they loved already dead. This was not a moral punishment. It was a structural rule of the universe. Time moved in circles, not straight lines. Seasons returned, souls returned, stories returned. Nothing was final. Even death was not the clean ending we imagine today. This circular view of time shaped everything. There was no single creation event and no final apocalypse. The world rose, collapsed, and rose again. Gods could be defeated and yet remain. Chaos could be pushed aside but never erased. History itself was a repeating rhythm, not a ladder climbing toward progress. Sacred places were not temples with walls and roofs. They were features of the land itself. A grove of oak trees, a misty hill, a bend in a river where offerings had been thrown for generations. These places were not symbols. They were believed to be thin spots where the layers of the world touched. A hill was not just a hill, it might be a doorway. A river was not just water. It might be a god moving slowly across the land. And at the center of this entire mental universe stood the Druids. Druids were not just priests. They were judges, poets, astronomers, and living libraries. Classical Roman writers like Julius Caesar tell us that Druids trained for up to 20 years, memorizing vast bodies of law, genealogy, ritual, and cosmology. They deliberately avoided writing sacred knowledge down, believing that wisdom should live in the human mind, not on dead bark. That choice preserved flexibility, but it also guaranteed loss. Druids were the keepers of memory. They decided which stories mattered. They recited the past into the present. When they vanished through Roman conquest, Christianization, and cultural collapse, the memory system of Celtic civilization collapsed with them. That is why this foundation matters. Without it, Celtic gods look random, heroes look irrational, fate looks cruel for no reason. But once you see the layered world, the circular time, the fragile boundary between gods and humans, and the deep role of memory, everything else clicks into place. Because in this worldview, nothing truly begins cleanly, and nothing ever fully ends. And as the firelight flickers across this ancient mental landscape, something older than the gods themselves is already stirring the first arrivals, the first disasters, and the first proof that this world was never meant to be stable for long. And the first proof of that instability arrives not as a single event, but as a slow, repeated rhythm of coming and going. The main source for these early stories is a medieval text called Lebor Gabala Érenn, the Book of the Taking of Ireland. It was written down by Christian monks around the 11th century, but it preserves much older mythic material. On the surface, it reads like a national history, a list of successive peoples who settle Ireland, are wiped out, and are replaced. But underneath, it is not really about history at all. It is about a universe that cannot hold still. The first arrival is a woman named Cessair. She comes before the biblical flood, fleeing a doomed world with a small group of followers. They land in Ireland, divide the land, and try to build a new beginning. It does not work. The flood comes anyway. Everyone dies except one man, Fionn, who survives by transforming into different animals and living for centuries. He becomes a witness to all later ages, a living thread of memory stretching across time. This already tells you something important. The story is not concerned with realism. It is concerned with continuity. Someone must always remain to remember what came before. The second invasion is led by Partholon. He brings farming, brewing, cooking, and the first organized society. Under his people, Ireland is finally civilized. Plains are cleared. Houses are built. Order is established. And then, suddenly, a plague arrives and kills them all in a single week. Every man, woman, and child is wiped out, leaving the island empty once again. No moral lesson is given, no crime is named. The destruction simply happens. Next comes Nemed and his people. They rebuild, they thrive, they spread across the island, but soon they encounter a new force, the Fomorians. These are not just enemies. They are not even fully human. They represent chaos itself, the wild sea, destructive storms, disease, and hunger. They demand heavy tribute from Nemed's people, 2/3 of their children, their grain, and their cattle. This is not symbolic. It is an image of an unbearable world order. Eventually, Nemed's people rebel and attack the Fomorian stronghold. They win the battle, but lose everything else. A second disaster strikes. Most of them die. The survivors scatter across the world. Ireland is empty again. Then, only now, do the Fomorians truly take center stage. In later tradition, they are described as monstrous beings, sometimes one-eyed, sometimes misshapen, sometimes half-divine. But their deeper role is more abstract. They are the principle of entropy. They are what happens when order breaks down. They come from the sea. They bring blight. They poison harvests. They impose impossible demands. And among them stands Balor of the Evil Eye. Balor is not just a villain. He is a walking catastrophe. His single eye is so destructive that it must be held shut by 4 men. When it opens, it withers armies and kills kings. He is associated with drought, death, and the burning sun. He does not negotiate. He does not evolve. He simply exists as a force that must eventually be confronted. This is not a normal good versus evil story. There is no permanent victory here. Every group that brings order is eventually crushed. Every golden age is temporary. The message is not subtle. The world is unstable by design. And this is why, for the Celts, history and myth were never separate categories. When medieval Irish monks wrote these stories down, they tried to make them line up with biblical chronology. They treated each invasion as if it were a real migration. But the structure of the narrative betrays a different mindset. This is not a timeline. It is a cycle. Civilization rises, civilization collapses, chaos returns, then order rises again. The characters change, the names change, the pattern does not. From a modern perspective, this can feel unsatisfying. We want progress, we want development, we want a final victory over darkness. But that is not how this mythic system thinks. Stability is temporary. Harmony is borrowed time. Disaster is not a glitch in the universe, it is a built-in feature. And that makes the later gods of Ireland easier to understand. They do not arrive into a clean, innocent world. They arrive into a land that has already been drowned, emptied, cursed, and corrupted. They do not create order from nothing. They inherit a battlefield that has already been lost multiple times. This is the deep logic behind the Celtic mythic worldview. Nothing is ever truly new. Nothing is ever truly safe. And nothing ever fully disappears. Even the Fomorians are not erased. They are pushed to the edges. They retreat into the sea, into storms, into the margins of later stories. They remain present as a threat that can always return. So when later myths describe gods fighting chaos or heroes struggling against fate, they are not introducing a new theme. They are continuing the oldest one. The world is not broken. It was born this way. And in the silence after these first failed civilizations, as the empty island waits for its next arrivals, something different is approaching, not just settlers, but beings who will finally look like gods, carrying strange weapons, impossible knowledge, and the first fragile promise of lasting order. They arrive without ships. In the old Irish telling, the Tuatha de Danann come down from the sky in dark clouds, landing in Ireland, as if they had always been meant to be there. Their name means the people of the goddess Danu, though Danu herself remains a shadowy figure, more presence than personality. What matters is not where they came from, but what they are. Not quite gods, not quite mortals, but something in between. A divine race shaped like humans, yet operating on a different level of reality. Later medieval writers tried to turn them into ancient kings or sorcerers. But the structure of the stories refuses that reduction. These beings bend physical law too easily. They cross between worlds without effort. They reshape land, weather, and fate itself. If they are not gods in the classical Greek sense, they are something more subtle personifications of cosmic principles wearing human faces. And unlike earlier arrivals, they do not simply conquer. They reorganize. The Tuatha de Danann represent order after chaos. Not perfect order, not eternal peace, but a system that actually works at least for a while. Their power does not come from brute force. It comes from something closer to technology. Their magic is not random spellcasting. It is specialized knowledge, craft, precision, tools that do exactly what they are built to do. This is symbolized by the 4 treasures they bring with them. First, the Spear of Lug. It never misses its target. It burns with its own heat, and must be kept submerged in water when not in use. This is not a heroic metaphor. It is a weapon system. Controlled, efficient destruction. Second, the Sword of Nuada. Once drawn, it guarantees victory. No enemy can escape it. It represents legal authority and rightful kingship, not emotional power, but institutional power. Third, the Cauldron of the Dagda. It never runs empty. No one leaves it unsatisfied. It is abundance made permanent, a guarantee that famine is not destiny. And finally, the Liafal, the Stone of Destiny. When a true king stands upon it, it cries out. Sovereignty is no longer just seized. It is recognized by the land itself. Together, these objects form a complete system: war, law, food, and legitimacy. This is not a fairy toolkit. It is a civilization blueprint. At the center of this new order stands the Dagda. He is often described as a large, rough-looking man with a club so big it can kill with one end and revive with the other. Later storytellers turn him into comic relief. That is a mistake. The Dagda is not a joke figure. He is the embodiment of balance. He controls time, seasons, life, and death. He owns the cauldron of abundance. He commands a harp that changes the weather and dictates the rhythm of the year. When he plays it, winter ends, or begins. He is not elegant. He is not glamorous. He is necessary. Where the Dagda represents structure, Brigid represents continuity. She is the goddess of poetry, healing, and fire. Three functions that sound unrelated until you see their shared logic. Poetry preserves memory. Healing restores order. Fire transforms raw matter into usable form. Brigid is civilization's nervous system. She is invoked by smiths, by doctors, by storytellers, and later by Christian monks, who quietly turn her into Saint Brigid without really changing her function. She is not a war goddess. She is not a ruler. She is what allows a society to keep functioning after trauma. Then there is Nuada. Nuada is the first king of the Tuatha De Danann. He is not chosen by popularity. He is chosen by ritual law. But he loses his kingship after losing his arm in battle. In this system, a king must be physically whole to rule. Imperfection is not just cosmetic, it is a cosmic flaw. For a time he is replaced. Then a physician god named Dian Sect crafts him a new arm made of silver. Nuada becomes whole again. He regains his throne. This matters because it reveals something cold about this mythic order. Even gods are constrained by rules they did not create. Law exists above personality. Structure outranks sentiment. And finally there is Lug. Lug is not the strongest god. He is not the king. He is something more modern. He is a polymath, a master of all arts. When he arrives at the court of the Tuatha De Danann, he is initially turned away. Each gatekeeper asks his profession. Smith, they have one. Warrior, already covered. Poet, redundant. Only when he says he is all of them does he gain entry. Lug represents adaptive intelligence. He is what happens when knowledge replaces brute power. He invents new battle strategies. He redesigns weapons. He negotiates alliances. He is the system upgrader of the pantheon. Together, these figures form a functional divine society. They bring agriculture, they bring law, they bring craft, they bring poetry, they bring memory. For the first time, Ireland is not just inhabited, it is governed. But the instability never disappears. The Tuatha De Danann do not arrive into an empty vacuum. The Fomorians are still there, watching from the sea. Chaos has not been defeated, it has only been delayed. And this is the quiet tension running beneath the beauty of this divine age. Because in a world that has already collapsed multiple times, even gods are not truly secure. And as the new order settles into place, as feasts are held and laws are declared, the old forces of disorder are already gathering their strength again, waiting for the moment when the balance will crack and the war of the gods will finally begin. Not as a single clash, but as a long, grinding collision between two principles that were never meant to coexist. The conflict between the Tuatha De Danann and the Fomorians is remembered as the Battle of Mag Tuath, or more accurately, two battles fought on the same plane. In mythic logic, repetition is never accidental. It means the first attempt failed to resolve what truly mattered. The first battle of Mag Tuath begins with high confidence. The Tuatha De Danann, newly settled and organized, face the Fomorians in open war. Their king, Nuada, leads from the front. He is brave, disciplined, and lawful, everything a ruler should be. But in the chaos of battle, his arm is severed. This is not just an injury. In the logic of this world, it is a cosmic malfunction. A king who is not physically whole cannot rule. Order cannot be imperfect. Nuada survives, but his authority does not. Even victory would not matter now. The Tuatha De Danann win the battle militarily, but lose it symbolically. Nuada steps down. A new king is installed, Brez, who is half Fomorian. At first this looks like reconciliation, a bridge between chaos and order. But Brez turns out to be a disaster. He is stingy. He disrespects poets. He underpays warriors. He demands heavy tribute for his Fomorian relatives. Under his rule, abundance dries up. Dignity collapses. Hospitality vanishes. This is not a moral story about bad leadership. It is a structural warning. You cannot stabilize chaos by placing it on the throne. The system breaks down from the inside. Eventually Brez is overthrown. Nuada, now restored with his silver arm, returns to power. But the damage is done. The Fomorians prepare for total war, and this time they do not come alone. They are led by Balor of the Evil Eye. Balor is not just a commander, he is a walking extinction event. His single eye, when opened, withers crops, kills soldiers, and poisons land. It is kept closed by attendants because its power is too dangerous to release casually. He represents the raw, impersonal force of destruction, not cruelty, not ambition, but annihilation as a natural process. Against him stands Lugh. This is where the story tightens into mythic geometry. Lugh is Balor's grandson. A prophecy had warned Balor that he would be killed by his own descendant, so Balor tried to prevent it. He imprisoned his daughter. He murdered her children, but one infant survives. Fate roots around human planning. This is not subtle symbolism. The myth is stating its rule clearly. Destiny is not a prediction. It is a structural outcome. You cannot escape it by brute force. The Second Battle of Mag Tuatha is not a chaotic melee. It is described as an organized campaign. The Tuatha De Danann prepare weapons, fortifications, and magical defenses. Each god takes on a tactical role. Physicians stand behind the lines reviving the fallen. Smiths forge weapons continuously. Strategists coordinate formations. This is not a fairy tale battle. It is a systems-level war between two world models. Nuada leads again. He fights bravely. He kills many enemies. And then Balor strikes him down. The rightful king is dead. This moment matters. Order does not win by the strength of its old ruler. The system has to evolve. Lugh steps forward. He does not charge blindly. He maneuvers. He uses a sling stone or spear, depending on the version, and drives it into Balor's eye. The force sends the eye through Balor's skull and out the back of his head, killing him and destroying Fomorian troops behind him in a chain reaction of death. It is not elegant. It is not heroic in the romantic sense. It is surgical. The war collapses after this. The Fomorians are defeated. Brez is captured. And here is where a modern audience usually expects an execution. It does not happen. Instead, Brez begs for mercy and offers a bargain. He will teach the Tuatha De Danann how to plough fields, how to sow crops, how to ensure agricultural abundance. And they accept. This is the philosophical core of the entire Celtic mythic system. Chaos is not exterminated. It is negotiated with, integrated, reduced, redirected. The Fomorians are pushed to the edges of the world, into the sea, into storms, into disease, into famine. They are no longer rulers, but they are not gone, because they cannot be. And watching all of this from the margins of the battlefield is the Morrigan. She is not a single personality. She is a composite force, a goddess of war, fate, and prophecy. She appears as a raven on the battlefield, as a washer of bloody clothes before death, as a seductive woman testing heroes, as a voice predicting outcomes no one wants to hear. She does not fight like the others. She does not command armies. She shapes probability. She foretells victory. She foretells doom. She speaks the future into existence. After the battle, she proclaims a prophecy describing the end of the world, not immediately, not as punishment, but as a distant inevitability. The collapse of seasons, the drying of rivers, the fading of order. This is not a contradiction to the victory. It is the point. The Tuatha De Danann win. Order triumphs. civilization stabilizes. But the Morrigan's prophecy makes something brutally clear. This victory is temporary. Evil is not destroyed. It is displaced. It is delayed. It is managed. And this is why Celtic mythology never offers a final resolution. There is no apocalypse that cleans the slate. There is no eternal kingdom that cannot fall. The war of the gods ends, but it does not stay ended, because the world itself is built on a fault line between structure and collapse. And as the Tuatha de Danann stand victorious on the blood-soaked plain, celebrating their fragile order, something new is already forming at the edges of the story. Not a new enemy, but a new kind of threat. Not chaos this time, but humanity. Arriving quietly and changing everything without realizing it. The next invasion is the one that matters most because it does not come from monsters or gods, it comes from people. In Irish tradition, they are called the Milesians, the ancestors of the modern Irish. In mythic terms, they are not heroic figures. They do not bring magical treasures. They do not descend from clouds. They arrive by ship, tired, weather-beaten, and very human. Their story is preserved again in the Lebor Gabala Erin, where they are treated as the final and rightful settlers of the island. What makes this episode strange is not that humans fight gods. It is that humans win. The Milesians land on Ireland and challenge the Tuatha de Danann for control of the land. The divine race responds not with immediate war, but with illusion. They summon storms. They create magical fog. They try to confuse and disorient the invaders at sea. For a moment it works. The Milesians are scattered. Some ships sink, others turn back. But they return, and this time they come prepared. Their poet, Emergin, recites a powerful incantation claiming Ireland as their destiny. In some versions, he names the elements of the land, wind, wave, sun, and stone, and binds them to his people through words. The Tuatha de Danann are forced into direct negotiation. Here is the key detail. The gods do not simply annihilate the humans. They agree to a compromise. The Milesians will rule the surface world. The Tuatha de Danann will rule what lies beneath. This is not a clean military defeat. It is a cosmic demotion. The divine race withdraws into the hollow hills, the ancient burial mounds, and the hidden places of the land. They retreat into the Otherworld permanently. They become invisible rulers of a parallel domain, no longer the public gods of Ireland, but something quieter and more ambiguous. This is the moment when gods turn into something else. The Tuatha de Danann become the Sidhe, a word that originally means mound or fairy hill, and later comes to mean the beings who dwell there. They also become the Sea, the people of the mounds. They are no longer addressed as kings of heaven and earth. They are treated as dangerous neighbours, powerful, capricious, hidden. And this is where Celtic mythology makes its most radical move. It does not kill its gods. It domesticates them. In Greek myth, old gods are overthrown by new gods. In Norse myth, gods die in a final apocalypse. In Celtic myth, gods are downgraded into folklore. They shrink, not in power but in narrative status. They become the good people, the fair folk, the hidden ones. They steal children, they bless cattle, they punish disrespect, they grant impossible gifts. They remain divine but no longer central. This is not a collapse of belief, it is a reframing of reality. For people living in medieval Ireland, this solved a practical problem. Christianity had arrived. Officially, pagan gods could no longer exist, but the land still felt haunted. Old sacred sites still felt active. Strange things still happened in forests and at rivers. So the gods were reclassified. They were no longer worshipped. They were negotiated with. Offerings were still left at fairy mounds. Wells were still treated as sacred. Certain trees were still never cut. But no one called these acts religion anymore. They were just common sense. This is how myth turns into folklore. And folklore is not weaker myth. It is myth that has learned how to survive under pressure. In this new system, the old gods are stripped of cosmic authority, but not of personality. The Dagda becomes a powerful fairy king. Brigid becomes a household spirit and then a Christian saint. Lugh becomes a master craftsman of the Otherworld. The Morrigan becomes a banshee-like figure of death and prophecy. The narrative center shifts away from them, and that shift is crucial, because once humans control the surface world, the rules of storytelling change. The universe is no longer primarily about gods organizing chaos. It is about mortals navigating a world that still contains traces of divine danger. This transition explains why later Celtic stories focus so heavily on heroes instead of gods. It explains why fate becomes more personal. It explains why tragedy replaces cosmic spectacle. It also explains why Celtic fairies are not cute. They are not tiny winged decorations. They are the fallen aristocracy of a defeated divine race. They remember ruling the world. They resent their exile. They follow their own laws, not human ones. And that bitterness seeps into every later story. So when a farmer vanishes into a hill and returns decades later, aged a single day, that is not a random fairy tale. It is a political echo of an ancient defeat. When a child is stolen by fairies and replaced with a changeling, that is not superstition. It is the memory of a world where gods once took whatever they wanted. The fall of the gods is not a war scene. It is a quiet, bureaucratic rearrangement of reality. The world does not explode. It is reassigned. The Tuatha de Danann step out of history and into legend. Humans take the sunlight, gods take the shadows. And from this moment on, every story Ireland tells is haunted by what used to live openly in the same fields where people now plough their crops. Because the gods are not gone. They are just underground. And the boundary between those two worlds, human and hidden, is about to become the most dangerous place of all. Because it is where two incompatible realities brush against each other. The Otherworld in Celtic mythology is not heaven. It is not hell. It is not a reward and it is not a punishment. It is a parallel layer of existence that runs alongside the human world, separated by nothing more than mist, water, or a bad sense of direction. In Irish tradition it is called Tir na Noch, the land of the young. In Welsh stories it is Anwan. In later romance it becomes Avalon. Different names, same structure. A realm where aging stops, sickness disappears, food is endless, and sorrow seems temporarily suspended. But this is not a utopia. It is a trap. The Otherworld operates on a different timescale. A single night of music and feasting can equal years, decades, or centuries in the human world. A hero can leave home in the evening and return to find their children long dead and their house in ruins. No curse is spoken. No warning is given. Time simply behaves differently there. This is not accidental world building. It is a direct continuation of the layered universe, introduced at the very beginning of the tradition. The Celts did not imagine a vertical cosmos, heaven above, earth below, hell beneath. They imagined a sideways cosmos. Worlds existing beside each other, occasionally bleeding into one another. The entrances to this realm are not grand gates. They are ordinary places that become extraordinary under the right conditions. A hollow hill, a burial mound, a cave by the sea, a lake at dawn, a forest path at twilight. These locations are not symbolic. They are literal access points. Thin places where the Sidhe can cross into the human world and humans can fall into theirs. And when that crossing happens, rules change. The first rule is food. In almost every story, humans who enter the Otherworld are warned not to eat or drink anything there. Those who do are bound permanently. The food does not poison them. It does not kill them. It anchors them. This is not moral symbolism about temptation. It is cosmological logic. Eating binds you to the time cycle of the realm you are in. If you consume Otherworld food, your body and soul begin operating on Otherworld rules. Returning becomes impossible. The second rule is departure. You are never supposed to go back. If you do, you are not supposed to touch the ground. In multiple stories, a human returns from Tir na Nog and leaps from their horse to greet loved ones. The moment their feet hit the soil, they instantly age into dust. Their centuries catch up with them in a single breath. This is not cruel irony. It is a statement about irreversibility. Once you cross into a different temporal system, you cannot fully reintegrate into the old one. The third rule is consent, and this is where the mythology becomes uncomfortable. Humans are often taken into the otherworld without permission. Lovers are lured, children are stolen, musicians are abducted, entire families vanish into hills and never return. These are not framed as moral crimes, they are framed as territorial rights, because the beings doing the taking are not playful fairies. They are former gods. The Sidhe are the Tuatha de Danann after their demotion. They still possess immense power. They still control time, weather, fertility, and death. But they no longer have public authority. They are an aristocracy in exile. And exiled aristocracies do not become kind. They become bitter. They follow their own laws, not human ones. They punish disrespect. They reward hospitality. They retaliate against trespass. They enforce ancient contracts no one remembers signing. This is why Celtic fairies are dangerous. They are not symbols of nature. They are political refugees from a lost divine order. Their courts mirror human courts, but colder. Their feasts mirror human feasts, but more hollow. Their beauty is intense, but unsettling. Their kindness is conditional. Their cruelty is casual. They are not good. They are not evil. They are not moral agents in a human sense. They are a parallel civilization with incompatible values, and this explains the strange emotional tone of Otherworld stories. They are not horror stories. They are not romance stories. They are not adventure stories. They are stories about dislocation. A human enters a place that feels better than the human world. No sickness, no labor, no aging, no war. And yet, something always feels wrong. The laughter is too smooth, the music never ends. The joy has no depth, because nothing in the otherworld changes. There is no history there, no progress, no decay. It is eternal present tense, and humans are not built for that. This is why so many heroes eventually choose to leave, even when they know it will destroy them. Mortality, in this worldview, is not a flaw. It is what gives meaning to experience. An endless feast is meaningless. A finite meal matters. This is also why the otherworld never becomes a paradise religion. It is not a place you aspire to die into. It is a place you fear falling into alive. And through all of this, the boundary remains thin. People in medieval Ireland genuinely believed in fairy abductions. Court records exist of families claiming their relatives had been taken by the Sidhe. Laws were passed about protecting fairy trees. Offerings were left at fairy mounds, well into the modern era. This is not superstition in the childish sense. It is a worldview that never fully severed the link between myth and daily life. So when you hear later Celtic stories about heroes, curses, and fate, remember this layer always exists in the background. The gods did not die. They relocated. They are still there. And every time a traveller vanishes into fog, or a child goes missing near a hill, the old logic whispers the same warning. The world you see is not the only one, and the one you cannot see does not care about your plans. And yet, humans kept making plans anyway, even knowing that the unseen world did not care about them. This is where Celtic mythology makes its second major shift. The gods fade into the background. The Sidhe remain dangerous and powerful, but they are no longer the center of the story. The spotlight moves to mortals, not because mortals are stronger, but because they are weaker. From this point on, the most important figures in Celtic tradition are not immortal beings who can retreat into the hills when things go wrong. They are humans who cannot escape the consequences of their actions. They age, they bleed, they make mistakes, and when they die, they stay dead. This change is not accidental. It reflects a different philosophical focus. Earlier myths were about how the world was structured. These stories are about how a human life is shaped inside that structure. And the structure is unforgiving. The Celtic hero is not a moral role model in the modern sense. He is not necessarily kind. He is not necessarily just. He is not even necessarily sane by our standards. What defines him is intensity. Intensity of loyalty, Intensity of rage, intensity of honor, intensity of suffering. The heroic ideal is not about living well. It is about living fully, even when that fullness is destructive. And the most important rule governing these heroes is something called a geas. A geas is a personal taboo or sacred obligation placed on an individual, usually by a supernatural being or through prophecy. It can be something simple, like never refuse hospitality, or something specific, like never eat dog meat, or never cross a certain river after sunset. On the surface, it sounds like superstition. In practice, it functions as a narrative time bomb, because a geas always conflicts with something else the hero must do. A king might have a geas never to break a promise, and another geas never to refuse a meal. One day, someone demands a promise that will require him to refuse hospitality later. No matter what he chooses, he will violate fate. This is not a puzzle meant to be solved. It is a demonstration of inevitability. Geasa do not exist to test virtue. They exist to make tragedy unavoidable. This is why Celtic heroes never escape their endings. They can delay them, they can fight them, they can bargain with gods, but they cannot cancel them. And this is where honor comes in. Honor in Celtic myth is not about fairness. It is about reputation and public integrity. A hero must be seen acting according to his role, even when it destroys him. To act otherwise is worse than death. This creates a brutal ethical system. If a hero knows a choice will kill him but preserve his honor, he is expected to choose death. If he knows a choice will save his life but make him dishonorable, he is expected to reject it. From a modern perspective, this looks insane. From within the mythic logic, it is coherent. Because in a world where fate cannot be escaped, the only freedom left is how you meet it. This is also why rage plays such a central role. Celtic heroes are not calm warriors. They are not disciplined soldiers. They are volatile, emotionally extreme figures who enter battle in altered states. Their fury is described as a physical transformation, bodies twisting, muscles swelling, faces contorting into something barely human. This is not just colorful exaggeration. It is a metaphor for what happens when social order collapses inside a person. In peaceful times, heroes are bound by rules. In battle, those rules are temporarily suspended, and that suspension is terrifying. Heroes are necessary because they protect society. They are also dangerous because they embody everything society is trying to control. This is the tension that drives most Celtic heroic stories. A hero saves his people and also brings disaster on them. He defends the kingdom and destabilizes it. He fulfills his destiny and destroys himself. And looming over all of this is fate. Not destiny in the Hollywood sense. Not a grand plan with a happy ending. Fate in Celtic myth is more like a pressure system. It is an invisible structure that bends events in certain directions regardless of human intention. Even gods are subject to it. Even the Sidhe cannot override it completely. Prophecies come true, not because characters believe in them, but because the narrative world itself is wired to produce them. This is why attempts to avoid fate always make it worse. This is why warnings never save anyone. This is why knowledge does not equal power. In this system, the hero's tragedy is not a mistake. It is the point, because the hero is not meant to win forever. He is meant to burn brightly enough to be remembered, and remembered long enough to become a story. This is why the next phase of Celtic mythology does not give us wise kings or peaceful saints. It gives us figures who are brilliant, unstable, violent, loyal, doomed, and unforgettable. And among them, one name will come to dominate everything else. A boy with a god for a father, a monster hidden inside his own body, and a fate that even the gods cannot untangle. His story is about to begin. And it begins the way all Celtic tragedies do, quietly, with a child who should never have been allowed to grow up into what he became. The Ulster cycle is the emotional core of Celtic heroic mythology, and at its centre stands Chulainn. His story is not about justice. It is not about victory. It is about excess, too much strength, too much loyalty, too much fate, pressing down on one human body. He is born as Setanta, a normal boy by human standards. except for one detail that already breaks the rules. His father is Lug, the god of all arts. In some versions, Lu appears in a dream and impregnates Setantha's mother. In others, he raises the boy secretly as a divine patron. Either way, the implication is clear. This child does not fully belong to the human world. The name Chulainn comes later, and it comes with blood. As a boy, Setantha visits the house of a smith named Chulainn. Chulainn owns a massive guard dog, trained to kill intruders. Through a misunderstanding, the dog attacks the boy. Setantha kills it in self-defense. When Chulainn is devastated by the loss of his protector, the boy offers a solution. He will take the dog's place until a new one can be trained. From that day on, he is called Chulainn, the Hound of Chulainn. It is a name that sounds heroic. It is actually a contract. From childhood, he is trained as a warrior. His education is not gentle. He is sent to the warrior woman Scarthach in Scotland, a figure who exists somewhere between human and goddess. She teaches him combat, strategy, endurance, and a set of secret techniques reserved for only one student. This includes the use of the gay bulgur, a spear so deadly it explodes inside a victim's body, killing them from within. This is not symbolic weaponry. This is industrial-scale violence condensed into a single tool. And Chulainn masters it. But the most terrifying thing about him is not his skill. It is something called the rheostrad, the warp spasm. When Chulainn enters battle, his body physically transforms. His muscles swell, his bones twist. One eye sinks into his skull, while the other bulges out. Blood steam rises from his head. He becomes unrecognizable, barely human. This is not a metaphor for anger. It is a mythic description of what happens when a human body becomes a weapon system. In this state, he does not distinguish between enemy and ally. He kills anything in his path. After battles, the people of Ulster have to calm him down by surrounding him with naked women, shocking him back into awareness through embarrassment and ritual. This is not heroic dignity. This is controlled monstrosity. The central episode of his life is the Tambo Cuilnge, the cattle raid of Cooley. It begins with Queen Medb of Connacht. Medb is not a villain in the cartoon sense. She is intelligent, politically ruthless, and obsessed with power. She wants to match her husband's wealth exactly. And when she learns that he owns a legendary bull she does not, she decides to steal an even greater one from Ulster. So she launches an invasion. At the worst possible moment, the warriors of Ulster are incapacitated by a supernatural curse that leaves them weak and helpless. All of them, except one. Chulainn, still technically a teenager, he stands alone against Medb's entire army. He does not fight them all at once. He challenges them to single combat, one by one, delaying the invasion through ritualized duels. Each day, another champion dies. Each night, Chulainn is secretly healed by Lu, who appears disguised as a traveling healer. This is not noble warfare. It is attrition, and it is brutal. He kills friends who have been forced to fight him. He kills foster brothers. He kills men who respect him. Every victory costs him something he cannot get back. Throughout this, the Morrigan stalks him. She appears to him as a young woman offering love. He rejects her. She curses him. She attacks him in animal forms: an eel, a wolf, a cow. He wounds her without recognizing her. Later, she appears disguised as an old woman milking a cow, and he blesses her unknowingly, healing her wounds. This is not romantic irony. It is a statement about how fate operates. The gods interfere. They help. They hinder. They manipulate. But they do not rescue. Eventually, Ulster's warriors recover and join the battle. The invasion collapses. The great bull is brought back. The war ends. And Chulainn survives, which in Celtic myth means the real suffering is still ahead. His death is not sudden. It is procedural. His enemies trick him into breaking his geasa, his sacred taboos. One forbids him from eating dog meat. Another forbids him from refusing hospitality. He is offered a meal of dog flesh. He cannot avoid violating one rule or the other. Fate closes its trap. In his final battle, he is mortally wounded. Unable to stand, he ties himself to a standing stone so he can die on his feet, still facing his enemies. Only when a raven the Morrigan lands on his shoulder do his attackers dare approach, realizing he is finally dead. This is not a noble ending. It is a stubborn one, and it explains why Celtic heroes are not good in the modern sense. They are not gentle. They are not stable. They are not morally clean. They are too extreme to function in peaceful societies. But they are exactly what this mythic world demands. Because in a universe ruled by unstable time, hostile gods, and unavoidable fate, moderation is not a survival strategy. Chulainn is not a role model. He is a pressure valve. He absorbs the violence of the world so his people can survive a little longer. And when he is gone, the silence he leaves behind is not relief. It is dread, because everyone knows something now. The age of heroes is burning itself out, and the next great figure will not be a raging boy god. He will be something quieter, older, wiser, and just as doomed in a different way. After Chulainn, the tone of Celtic mythology changes. The world is still dangerous, fate is still unavoidable, but something vital is fading. The raw, explosive energy of the Ulster cycle gives way to something quieter, slower, and heavier. This is the world of the Fenian cycle, and its central figure is Fionn mac Cumhaill. Fionn is not born into glory. His father Cumhaill is killed before he is born, betrayed by rivals within the warrior bands known as the Fionn. His mother hides him away to protect him, raising him in the wilderness under false names. This is not the beginning of a heroic ascent. It is the beginning of a long survival story. Unlike Chulainn, Fionn is not defined by rage. He is defined by intelligence. The turning point of his life comes with the salmon of knowledge. A poet named Fenian spends 7 years trying to catch a legendary salmon that contains all the world's wisdom. When he finally catches it, he asks the young Fionn to cook it for him, warning him not to taste it. While cooking, Fionn burns his thumb and instinctively sucks it. In that moment, all the salmon's knowledge floods into him. From then on, whenever he presses his thumb to his teeth, he gains prophetic insight. This is not a battle scene. It is a transfer of authority. In earlier myths, power came from weapons and strength. Here, power comes from information. Fionn does not become a hero by killing something. He becomes a hero by understanding something. Eventually, he joins the Fionn and rises to leadership. The Fionn are not a royal army. They are a semi-independent warrior brotherhood who live outside normal society, hunting, fighting, and enforcing their own codes of honor. To join them, recruits must pass impossible tests, reciting poetry while being chased through forests, defending themselves while buried waist-deep in earth, leaping over spears without breaking branches. This is still a violent culture, but it is a disciplined one. Fionn rules not through fear, but through judgment. He settles disputes. He solves mysteries. He uses strategy instead of brute force. Where Chulainn embodied the crisis state of a collapsing world, Fionn embodies its attempt to stabilize. And that attempt is already failing, because the magic that supports this world is thinning. The most famous sign of this comes through Fionn's son, Oisin. Oisin falls in love with a woman from the Otherworld and is taken to Tir na Nog, where he lives in perfect happiness. He does not age, he does not suffer, he forgets time. Eventually, he becomes homesick. He returns to Ireland on a magical horse, warned not to touch the ground. But when he tries to help some men lift a heavy stone, he falls. The moment his foot touches the earth, centuries crash into him. He becomes a frail old man in seconds. The Fionn are long dead. Fionn is gone. The heroic age is over. Oisin's tragedy is not just personal. It is cultural. He is a man from a mythic world waking up in a historical one. He meets St. Patrick in later stories and tells him about the old days. The saint listens politely. The stories feel like fantasies now. The world they describe no longer exists. This is what the dying magic actually means. Not that spells stop working, but that the structure of reality itself is changing. The Otherworld is retreating further away. The Sidhe intervene less often. Heroes stop being larger than life. Adventures become smaller, the stakes become more local, the universe contracts. Fionn himself does not die in a heroic blaze. In some versions, he simply fades away. In others, he falls asleep under a hill, waiting for a future time when Ireland will need him again. This is not resurrection mythology. It is deferred relevance. He is no longer appropriate for the world that follows him. And this is why the Fenian cycle feels sad in a different way than the Ulster cycle. Chulainn dies young and violently. Fionn survives long enough to watch his world vanish. His tragedy is not that he is defeated. It is that he becomes obsolete. This shift marks the end of the heroic age. After this point, Celtic mythology stops producing world-shaking figures. It produces local legends, fairy encounters, moral tales, and ghost stories. The gods are already underground. The heroes are already gone. What remains is memory. And memory is not power. It is residue. So as Fionn's name fades into folklore, and Oisin's voice becomes just another old man telling impossible stories to a saint, the message settles into place. The magic is not destroyed. It is receding. And the world that follows will be quieter, more ordinary, and much less forgiving. Which is exactly the kind of world where something like King Arthur can start to form. Not as a god, not as a monster, but as a man trying to hold a collapsing age together with laws, symbols, and borrowed myths from a past that no longer quite fits. While Ireland was watching its heroic age fade into folklore, something parallel was happening across the sea in Wales. The Welsh mythic tradition preserves a different angle on the same cosmic decline. Its core text is the Mabinogion, a collection of medieval stories written down in the 12th and 13th centuries, but drawing on much older oral material. Like the Irish cycles, these tales are not clean fantasies. They are hybrid narratives, where pagan gods have been quietly rebranded as kings, heroes, and sorcerers. The Otherworld is still there. It is still called Unknown, and it is still ruled by a figure who is not quite human. His name is Aron. In the first branch of the Mabinogion, Aron is the king of Unknown. He swaps places for a year with a mortal king named Pwyll, asking him to rule the Otherworld in his stead. Pwyll does it successfully, respecting Aron's wife, maintaining order, and returning power honestly at the end of the year. This is not a fairy story about temptation. It is a political myth about legitimacy. Aron is not a demon. He is not a god in the Christian sense. He is a sovereign of a parallel realm, operating by rules that predate human law. He represents the same exiled divine class as the Sidhe in Ireland, beings who still control cosmic functions, but no longer dominate the surface world. And this is where Arthur enters the picture. In early Welsh tradition, Arthur is not a knight in shining armour. He is not a chivalric ideal. He is a war leader, a military commander holding together a collapsing post-Roman Britain against invading forces. He appears in early poems like Why Gododin, and later in stories that present him less as a king and more as a superhuman champion, someone who hunts monsters, fights giants, and leads elite warrior bands. This Arthur is closer to Fionn than to a medieval monarch. He does not preside over courtly romance. He survives in a landscape haunted by older powers, and surrounding him are figures who look suspiciously like downgraded gods. Take Merlin. In early Welsh tradition, he is called Myrddin. He is not a wizard in a pointed hat. He is a wild prophet, a madman, driven insane by battlefield trauma, who retreats into the forest and speaks in riddles about the future. This is not decorative mysticism. This is a druidic archetype. Merlin preserves the role of the old priest class, the keepers of memory, prophecy, and cosmic law, stripped of institutional power, but still dangerously knowledgeable. He does not control events. He predicts them, and his predictions always carry a tone of exhaustion. He knows the age is ending. He just does not know how to stop it. Then there is the cauldron. In Welsh myth, magical cauldrons appear again and again. The cauldron of the Dagda in Irish tradition never runs empty. In Welsh tradition, a similar cauldron appears in the story of Bran the Blessed. It can resurrect the dead, but only as mute, hollow beings without full life. This is not heroic resurrection. It is compromised survival. The symbolism is precise. The old magic can still perform miracles, but those miracles are degraded. They no longer restore wholeness. They only delay loss. And this is where the Holy Grail comes from. Long before it becomes a Christian relic, the Grail is a haunted container, a vessel of sustenance, healing, and life. In its earliest form, it is not a cup used by Jesus. It is a mythic cauldron repurposed into Christian narrative. This is not coincidence. It is cultural recycling. The Church did not invent the Grail. It baptized it. And the same process happens with Arthur himself. Over time, as these stories are retold by Christian writers, Arthur transforms. He becomes a moral king, a lawgiver, a symbol of righteous rule. The monsters fade, the giants vanish. The raw mythic chaos gets smoothed into chivalric order. But the original Arthur is not that clean. He is a man standing in the ruins of a mythic world, borrowing authority from gods who no longer rule, advised by prophets who no longer control fate, wielding symbols whose original meanings are already being forgotten. He is not the start of something new. He is the last echo of something old. And this is the deeper connection between Celtic mythology and Arthurian legend. Arthur is not a break from the pagan world. He is its afterimage. A figure formed at the moment when gods have become folklore, heroes have become stories, and magic has become rumour, which is why his kingdom never quite lasts, which is why his victories never quite resolve anything, and which is why, in every version of his legend, he is not said to die. He is said to go away, taken to Avalon, the same otherworld, the same hidden realm, the same place where all the old powers retreat when their time in the human world is finally over. And as Arthur fades into that same mist, the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. The gods fell, the heroes faded, the kings followed them, and now only one question remains. What, exactly, survived all of this? What survived, and what was quietly erased? When Christianity reached the Celtic world, it did not arrive as a single wave that wiped everything clean. It arrived unevenly, over centuries, through missionaries, political shifts, and slow cultural pressure. And the people who ultimately decided how the old world would be remembered were not warriors or kings. They were monks. These monks were not neutral recorders of tradition. They were editors, translators, filters. They took an enormous, chaotic body of oral mythology and tried to make it fit inside a Christian moral universe. This did not mean destroying everything, it meant reframing it. The old stories were too beloved to erase, so they were rewritten. Gods became kings, kings became heroes, heroes became fairies, and anything that could not be safely reinterpreted was either moralized, softened, or pushed into the background as something dangerous and vague. This is why so many Celtic deities suddenly appear in medieval texts as ancient rulers or mighty warriors instead of divine beings. It is not that people forgot they were gods. It is that calling them gods had become theologically illegal. The Tuatha de Danann, once a divine race, are reduced to a pre-Christian people who ruled Ireland before humans. Their magic becomes sorcery. Their immortality becomes longevity. Their descent underground becomes a convenient metaphor for political defeat instead of a cosmic shift. The Fomorians, once embodiments of chaos and entropy, are turned into literal monsters or demons. Their symbolic role as necessary disorder in a balanced universe is flattened into simple evil. This is not subtle distortion. It is ideological surgery. And then comes demonization. Figures associated with death, war, sexuality, or sovereignty become morally suspect. The Morrigan, once a goddess of fate and battle, becomes a sinister hag or an evil spirit. Cernunnos, a horned god of nature and fertility, is quietly absorbed into the visual language of medieval devils. Gods who embodied ambivalence are recast as threats. The old religion had no absolute good or evil. Christianity demanded one. So the grey areas were blackened. At the same time, something else was happening. Some gods were not demonized. they were canonized. The clearest example is Brigid. In pre-Christian Ireland, Brigid is a goddess of poetry, healing, fire, and craftsmanship. She is a high-status deity associated with fertility and inspiration. After Christianization, she becomes Saint Brigid of Kildare, one of the most important saints in Ireland. This is not coincidence. It is strategic continuity. Her sacred fire becomes a Christian miracle. Her healing powers become divine grace. Her role as a protector of poets and craftsmen is preserved almost unchanged. Even her feast day remains the same as the pagan festival of Imbolc. This is not conversion. It is rebranding. The church did not replace Brigid. It renamed her. And this pattern repeats across the Celtic world. Sacred wells become holy wells. Old ritual days become Christian holidays. Local spirits become saints with suspiciously non-biblical powers and regional attachments. This is why Celtic Christianity feels different from Roman Christianity. It is layered. It carries an older substrate underneath the theology. But this process also caused irreversible loss. Oral tradition depends on performance, on memory, on ritual repetition. When the Druids were suppressed and their role eliminated, entire bodies of knowledge vanished. We lost the original versions of countless myths. We lost cosmological frameworks that were never written down. We lost symbolic systems that were replaced by biblical metaphors. What survives now is a curated fragment, a Christianized shadow of a pagan world, and yet not everything was erased. Some things survived between the lines. The cyclical view of time still echoes in seasonal festivals. The idea of sacred landscapes still clings to hills, rivers, and trees. The Otherworld still appears in folklore as fairy realms and ghostly islands. The old respect for fate and taboo still lingers in story patterns, even when the original meanings are forgotten. And the deepest survival is structural. Celtic stories still refuse clean moral endings. They still resist total victory. They still insist that power fades, that order decays, and that nothing, not even the gods, escapes time. This is not Christian doctrine. This is pagan memory. So what we have today is not Celtic mythology in its original form. We have its fossil record, a pressure-formed imprint of something older, filtered through monks who tried to make it safe, moral, and theologically acceptable. They did not destroy the old world. They buried it. And like all buried things, it still pushes upward in distorted, half-forgotten shapes. Which brings us to the final question. Not what the Celts believed, but why their worldview still refuses to die. Which is why these stories still feel unfinished. Celtic mythology does not close with a final victory, a saved world, or a perfect moral resolution. It ends the way it lived, quietly, unevenly, without certainty. That is one reason these myths still feel alive. They do not sit behind glass like a sealed museum artifact. They behave more like a weather system that never fully clears. There is always another tide coming in, another hero aging, another god fading into something smaller. The world is never fixed, only temporarily arranged. In most mythologies, there is a promise of restoration, a final kingdom, a golden age waiting at the end of time. Celtic tradition does not offer that comfort. It gives you cycles instead, rise and fall, order and decay, youth and loss, magic thinning into memory. Even the gods do not escape this pattern. They win their wars, then they are replaced. They rule their realms, then they retreat underground. They are worshipped, then they are rewritten. There is no permanent rescue built into this universe, only continuation. And strangely, that is where its emotional power comes from. The Celtic worldview does not pretend the world is fair. Heroes die young. Love is not enough. Honor does not guarantee safety. Fate breaks rules without apologizing. Even the best characters make choices that ruin their own lives. Yet the stories do not collapse into bitterness. They remain tender. They keep noticing beauty even when loss is certain. That combination tragedy without nihilism is rare. It is also deeply modern. This is why Celtic mythology slips so easily into fantasy literature. Tolkien borrows its sense of fading magic, its bittersweet tone, its idea that the most important age has already passed. The forests in Middle-earth feel like places that remember gods. The elves feel like Tuatha de Danann, who stayed too long. Modern fantasy keeps repeating this structure because it fits how people actually experience history. Not as progress, but as erosion. Even folklore carries this weight. Fairy stories are not about wish fulfillment. They are about rules, consequences, and bargains that cannot be undone. Step into the wrong hill, eat the wrong food, fall in love with the wrong being. You will not be punished. You will be transformed. And that, finally, is the Celtic insight. The world does not exist to save you. It exists to change you. Meaning is not handed down from the sky. It is carved out of loss, memory, and brief moments of brightness that cannot be held. The Celtic tradition does not promise justice. It promises depth, and in a world that still feels unstable, unfair, and quietly beautiful at the same time, that promise still rings uncomfortably true. The gods fade, the heroes fall, the stories remain, not because they are comforting, but because they are honest.